IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
In my leadership work, I work with male archetypes, king, warrior, magician, lover. And I found that I couldn't just relate to them. So one day I was just thinking, what could be the female equivalence? And it was very interesting. One of the books that I read around that time was a version of the Ramayana called The Forest of Enchantments by Chitra Banerjee. And that was the Ramayana from a woman's perspective. And I started reading books like that, and I could see there were certain patterns. At that time, I was also doing work around archetypes in my leadership development. So the whole idea is to take some of these old stereotypes and see what's really going on in there and see it as sources of energy and power that we already have access to. In fact, somebody just wrote to me saying, I discovered I was a Kanya, but I thought I would like to be a Veera, right? So we've been conditioned to think that certain powers which are closer to masculine are more admirable, and certain other things which are seen as womanly are weak. And I really wanted to question that.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Coffee Podcast. My guest today is Nirupama Subramanian, the author of Powerful, a book whose tagline reads, The Indian Woman's Guide to Unlocking Her True Potential. In the book, Nirupama breaks down the female traits into 6 feminine power models. Kanya, the innocent maiden; Apsara, the seductive beauty; Veera, the rebel warrior; Rani, the noble queen; Ma, the nurturing caregiver; and Rishika, the wise seeker. What I loved about the book is that it takes these negative gender stereotypes and weaponizes them positively into tools that women can actually use. I found the book to be a breezy, fun, inspiring read, and not at all what I expected when I read the premise. And much of it has to do with the way Nirupama has written the book, from real-life examples in Indian politics, cinema, and sports to examples from mythology and scriptures, which is not surprising given Nirupama's background as a very senior leadership coach who's worked with some of the largest corporate organizations in India, and also as an author of 2 fictional works before this. I want to speak to Nirupama about the various inspirations for this book, the process of writing this, and also how she looks at Powerful as not just a book, but an entire coaching ecosystem to empower women from different backgrounds. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Coffee Podcast.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are 0 charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into a show about crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
Welcome to the Filter Coffee Podcast, Nirupama. How has this last year and a half been for you?
Thank you, Karthik. Pleasure to be here. The last year and a half has been very interesting. I think that's the word I will choose. And I think there is some proverb, maybe Chinese, which says, may you live in interesting times. And I don't know whether that's a blessing or a curse, but that's what the whole of last year has been. Very interesting, new things happening, new learnings. And I think at the end of it all, I'm left with, wow, we've actually gone through 1.5 years of something very, very new and different.
Right. Did the book sort of happen during this time, or were you sort of thinking about it even before?
Much before. In fact, it got accepted for publication last year after the pandemic, but I had finished the first draft little before that, in somewhere in 2019. By end of 2019, I'd finished it. And of course, after that, there was quite a bit of rework and stuff that happened, but it happened before the pandemic.
Oh, lovely. Nirupama, when I started reading the book, I thought it was going to be very intense and preachy, even, because that's what the premise promised. The book was intense, but it was also fun, inspiring, and an overall brilliant experience. My question is something like this. You start the book talking about two mythological or literary characters, right? One is Vasuki, who is the wife of the Tamil poet Thiruvalluvar, and the other is Savitri from the Satyavan Savitri story. Two women whose entire life and their body of work has always been judged through the lens of the relationship they had with their men, like how devoted they were, how loyal they were, etc. So my question is this, right? We've all been shaped by the stories we've read, and it's very clear from your book that for generations, our psyche has been developed and it's been shaped by these stories from Indian mythology and Indian literature, right? How bad is this hangover really?
Absolutely, completely. Firstly, let me say thank you. I'm glad you found the book enjoyable. And I'm also very glad because this book is not just for women, though that's what the title says. I think it's a book that everybody will find it interesting. So I'm very glad that, the apprehensions you had were unfounded after you read it. And I think stories are, what I'm actually doing is telling a story. And human civilization, everything is built around stories. So I think stories are extremely important in many ways. One, they entertain, but they also educate, and they are used to convey certain messages. And every culture is a product of the stories we've grown up with. So, we buy into the stories, we believe in them, and we grow up hearing stories, and that plays out in our lives as well. Yeah, so I think all the stories we tell are become a very, very important part of our lives, whether we tell it through movies or books, or whether it's just passed on as a fable across generations. And that's what we've grown up with.
Right. You mentioned that the thought of the book sort of has been with you for a few years now, right? I wanted to sort of track that the journey of that spark, right? When did you know that you wanted to write about this and in this particular fashion?
So, I have been writing for a long time. My first two books were fiction. So there were novels, which is very different. But of course, when I was writing this book, I realized that in a way they were leading up to this because both of them are stories of women going through transformation. But the idea for this book also came from the work that I do as a leadership development coach, as a facilitator, and I engage and interact with both men and women, how shall I say, at a closer, deeper level. We have these long conversations, peeling layers, understanding what they're about. And I began to see just there were different issues that women would bring up, which men never did. Though some of their situations were the same. A lot of my work is, leadership level coaching. So I just began to notice patterns also from my own life, right? As at a particular stage of life, what I was going through. So both personal and professional experiences informed this book. And my initial thought was actually not around writing powerful. I wanted to explore how we are informed by stories, right? How stories and narratives of mythology shape us as women. But somewhere I came up, just reading many books, noticing patterns, came up with the idea of 6 feminine powers. And then I built the book around this model that these are the energies. And I was reading about power, I was doing work with power, and it was just connecting a whole lot of dots and putting them together in this particular book. So it went through some iterations.
Right.
I kind of figured I would write it at some point of time.
Right.
Your previous two books, Nirupama, were fiction, right? Keep the Change and Intermission. Rarely have I seen such a smooth shift in an author from fiction to non-fiction. So I wanted to ask you, what is the change in your process between those two books and this one?
So the other two books in a way, of course, they were fiction, but they were also drawn a lot from my own observations and experiences. So Keep the Change is the story of this good girl from Chennai who goes to Bombay to work in a foreign bank. Complete coincidence, but that's what I did, right? So though all characters are not real, but I drew a lot from my experiences. And at that stage of my life, so I think I wrote it in 2008, I think, I was writing a lot of humor, and I was writing fun stories for some women's magazines. So I was at a different stage of life, and this was like, I guess, the semi-autobiographical novel that you write and you do that. So that was Keep the Change. Yet when I referenced it in Powerful, I could see it's a story of transformation of a young woman, and she moves from a particular power to embracing another power. So it was not very different. Intermission came about because I live in Gurgaon in a large condominium, and it was fascinating for me to observe what was going on around me, the conversations we had, and that informed Intermission. So in a way, it was my context again that led to Intermission, and the way it panned out was as a novel, though it was slightly different. And then actually, I think it was in 2012 that I started doing more of coaching and leadership development work. And for the last 4 years, I started doing a lot of work with women. So I set up a company along with my co-founder called Growing Leadership of Women. So started doing coaching women. So in a way, it was also my life experience and context. And to be honest, I couldn't think of a story that that would fit. So we said, okay, but this is an interesting model. Maybe instead of writing 6 short stories about the 6 different powers, I decided to do this. And for the last few years, I've been just coincidentally writing a lot of nonfiction. So I used to write a column on travel for National Geographic. I used to write a column on women called Women at Work, first for IBN and then for She the People. So I was writing nonfiction, and that was the context. So it just seemed like, for me, it seemed like a natural thing. And I didn't have an idea for the next story. So it just worked out that way.
Right. But I think the common thread that I see in all three, or even in Powerful, you take a lot from your experiences, not just as a professional, but also growing up, your time going to college, going to buses, taking buses in Chennai and all of that, right? Like I find that those personal anecdotes continue in your third book as well.
Yes. And this time it's not fiction, right? It's not even disguised as fiction. It's what happens to me. And I think that's also what resonates. Like after reading this, a few people wrote into me and said, I had the same experience in a bus, right? So it's interesting. So there's a lot of resonance that comes from the stories that you tell.
Right. And, I'm going to go back to your inspirations towards writing this. What I found really interesting, and this thought occurred to me after I read the book, is we talk about stereotypes and archetypes as a negative thing, especially when we are talking about the gender inequality.
Yes.
Right? And what I loved about your approach, and I would love for you to spend some more time on this, is you actually pick specifically those archetypes, those quote unquote stereotypes, and then created them as actually tools that you could use in different situations.
Yes.
Right? Talk to us a little bit about arriving at that as the premise of the book.
Yeah. So, these archetypes are what we grew up with, right? If you tell any woman from our context, and I'll say Indian subcontinent, because I think, I've lived in Bangladesh for a few years, and I know people, let's say, from the broad Indian subcontinent. Everybody knows when you say Kanya, the good girl, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about, right? And when you say Apsara, people just get what this is about, at least at the stereotypical level. So in my leadership work, I worked with male archetypes, right? So, king, warrior, magician, lover. And I found that I couldn't just relate to them. So one day I was just thinking, what could be the female equivalence? And then I started reading a little bit more. And it was very interesting. One of the books that I read around that time was a version of the Ramayana called The Forest of Enchantments by Chitra Banerjee. And that was the Ramayana from a woman's perspective. And I started reading books like that. And I could see there were certain patterns. So in fact, the biggest influences were actually going back to the Mahabharata. And I was reading some stories around the Mahabharata and reading...
Sorry to interrupt you there, but what was the different perspective in Chitra Banerjee's book?
The point of view from Sita, right? And giving more space to other women characters. So I think that was interesting. I mean, we always knew this, right? It was not something new. But at that time, I was also doing work around archetypes in my leadership development. Then, as I was watching certain movies, you discuss these movies, you know exactly there's a story that follows, right? There's a good girl, there's the sacrificing mother. And I mean, I'm a big movie buff. And I was watching these movies and I'm saying the same stories in many ways are just being played out, right, across all of this. So that was the whole point of saying we see and we expect some of these archetypes to be perpetuated in a particular way, but each of them actually can be a huge source of power. It doesn't have to be something negative, right? For example, the Apsara archetypes, so the Apsara is what I call the seductive beauty, has always been seen as this dangerous force. It's the wicked woman, like Shurpanaka, who expresses her desire, you get your nose chopped off, right? And you begin to see this, not just 2000 years ago, but even today, it plays out in our culture. And when I had started having conversations with women, I found that it resonated a lot. And the mother, right? Huge. A lot of women I coach have this huge guilt thing about motherhood. So you're supposed to be this ideal, noble, sacrificing Mother India type of a mother. And, it's very difficult to live up to those standards. So, but a mother is also a huge source of power, nurturing, creative, even destructive powers. So the whole idea is to take some of these old stereotypes and see what's really going on in there and see it as sources of energy and power that we already have access to. But conditioning and all has made us see only a particular side of it. Like the good girl should always be obedient, submissive, docile. But there is a huge power in being likable, optimistic, positive, cheerful, lightheartedness, joy. In fact, somebody just wrote to me saying, "Oh, I discovered I was a Kanya, but I thought I would like to be a Veera," right? So we've been conditioned to think that certain powers which are closer to masculine are more admirable, and certain other things which are seen as womanly are weak. And I really wanted to question that, especially in today's context.
Yeah, in fact, as you were talking about this, and as I was reading the book, I was reminded of a conversation I had with this person called Muskan Sethi, and she's the first women's professional poker player from India.
Okay.
And she used to talk about this in very similar way. What you just mentioned reminded me a lot of that conversation. We used to say that if you're a woman on a poker table, people always think of you as a pushover, someone who you can overwhelm very easily and stuff like that. And rather than being angry about it, she said that she started using it as a weapon.
Exactly.
Right? She'll use it as a facade. Well, in reality, she's an extraordinarily aggressive roller, right? Extraordinarily aggressive poker player, right? So she's talking about how it was great that people had that stereotype of her and how she used it to sort of
to her advantage.
To her advantage, right? That was brilliant. And you speaking about Kanya, and one thing I really loved is, like I mentioned at the beginning, this book is filled with so many examples and parallels, so that you get a very very clear picture of the different ways in which it can manifest. And I was reminded when you talked about Kanya that you actually have a section there talking about the rise and fall of someone like Smriti Irani, where she is expected to behave in a certain way and then she doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how maybe you can use this example or something else, about how your narrative itself is taking shape and why it is important to give those examples and talk about the subject through them?
Yeah, I think firstly, I find it fascinating, right? So I just I started doing research. And when I say research, it included everything from reading books to watching YouTube interviews with these women to watching episodes of, Rendezvous with Simi Garewal. So you get to see the real person, behind the persona, right? So, and I found, some of these stories were very interesting, very compelling, and I'm fascinated by stories. So that's how I try to relate this to real stories. And for me, one of the very fascinating stories is that of Jayalalitha, the erstwhile chief minister. And I've mentioned that in the book as well, because, growing up, I've seen her as a film actress, and then she's the chief minister. And that's been a big story of transformation and transition for her. And she's had to do different things at different stages in order, to survive, in order to thrive, in order to make her presence felt. So we don't stay in any one particular power, one particular archetype all through our lives. We will go through changes, and depending upon the circumstance, depending upon what my context wants me to do, I do keep changing. So that's how that came about, right? So interestingly, though Jayalalitha had a persona of this mother figure, which is what she needed to adopt in order to survive in politics, after reading and researching, I found at heart she was actually a bit of a Kanya and a Rishika who wanted a quiet life and to pursue academics, and wanted to be away from all the limelight that she had. But because she was inherently a Kanya, I think, and this is, of course, my theory and research, and I think in order to please the people in her life and live up to expectations, she did a lot of things which were not natural to her. So it's really interesting to, look at people and see what is the narrative that their life has taken. Everybody, all of us will go through that. So that's how I use these real life examples. So it's easy to connect. It's easy to relate to people who are in the public eye and who you think you know.
Exactly. And that's a great sentence, right? Because, I grew up in Chennai around the time Jayalalitha was also evolving as a political leader. And there was just so many opportunities to absolutely hate her, right? If you were living anywhere in Chennai, first, uh, she comes across as this extremely self-important person. And then this entire culture of how she made MLAs and heads of their parties fall at her
Fall
feet,
at her feet. Yeah.
and create this aura of
Mother
Amma.
goddess. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But it's funnily enough, many years later, after I had moved out of Chennai and I was living in Delhi, that I was luckily, in a flight next to a very renowned politician, Mr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, and I was speaking to him incidentally about Jayalalitha. This is, of course, many years after her passing, a few years after her passing, and then he made a very interesting statement in that conversation. He said that this was a great way for her to thrive. It was also a bit of a defense mechanism, because she had to create this aura so that what happened to her in the 90s will never happen again.
Exactly. Right. So everything, the way she started dressing, the way she started behaving, it was her persona, and she used that in order exactly to survive and thrive. Right? So it may not. So sometimes that's the whole thing. Sometimes when we adopt that image or persona, we also adopt its excesses. Right? So we might go to the extreme, which probably is what alienated a lot of people, because that's not naturally you, and you're projecting something larger than life in order for you to be successful. So I think, that's what she was doing.
Nirupama, you've spent a lot of time in the corporate world, mostly as a leadership coach. And in fact, in the book, you quote a lot of stats from the corporate world. And one quote that you've made, which is from a World Economic Forum research, sort of stayed with me. It basically says that it will take us 257 years to achieve gender parity at the workplace globally. Basically, we'll get there at 2276 in the current pace. Now, I always knew things were bad, but when you put it like this, you exactly know what's wrong with the world, isn't it? I wanted to ask you, what are some of the real life anecdotes and incidents you've seen with women in the corporate world, which in some fashion has inspired this book?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is based on real life incidents. So I've, all the case studies that I have used in the book are drawn on combination of situations that I've encountered as a coach, not just in the coaching context, but also in conversations with different people. And actually, over the last couple of weeks, I've been having very interesting conversations with people who've read the book, and they say, this is it. This is exactly what happens, right? So a lot of it is based on real life things. So I'll give you an example. I was recently doing a workshop for women leaders, and we were talking about what are the barriers and what comes in the way from you taking on a higher level or aspiring to leadership positions. And almost unanimously, everybody said family commitments.
Hmm.
Right? It's like the kids are my responsibility. For some of them, it's kids plus spouse. For some of them, it's kids plus spouse plus in-laws. So, if I take up a more challenging and demanding position, I will not be able to do justice to my family commitments. And you never hear a man saying that.
Yeah.
You never hear a man saying that's a barrier to my growth. In fact, the male way of thinking is my working is for my family, right? So it's very different. It's never seen as something which is going against family commitments. So the male way of thinking is, it's my duty to work so that I provide for my family, not actually physically, I don't have to be present to take care of them. I just need to bring in the money and I need to show up at work because that is my way of honoring family commitments. Now, women have an added complication because traditionally their role was family commitment, right? And now we are saying, okay, and I think we want to go out, we want to work, we want to be economically independent, but this family commitment part hasn't gone anywhere. It's still seen as for women, being physically present in the home and actually taking care of family is still seen as a very important, if not primary role. And I hear this again and again. So these are all based on situations. In fact, one woman I'm coaching actually had a long conversation on should I quit or not, because I'm worried how my child will turn out if I'm not fully present there at home for him. So it continues to exist. It is very real. And that is why, that's why it's there in the book, because these things happen. And like mothers feel guilty about leaving their children and going to work, right? What will happen to them? And then everybody's saying family is number one as my value. And what does that mean? It means I have to put their needs first. And there is no question of questioning that, right? It's almost like that everything else is I'm allowed. Like 2 days ago, women said, I'm so glad I've been allowed to work after marriage. So it exists, it's there.
Right. Again, another thing I loved is you've taken a lot of examples from even individuals, from your real life incident,
Yeah.
and then incorporated them in the book, right? Like you speak about Savita, the person who attended a lot of retreats, and Shafia, the HR professional.
Yeah. All names change to protect the
Of course.
identity of the individual.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But it gives a lot of context
Yes.
to what you're saying. But the point you just made, Nirupama, is this also something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last year and a half, is also that this entire work from home piece has been particularly unfair to women, isn't it? It's especially people who are, for the most part, managing households and at the same time also working.
Yes.
Right? It's been extraordinarily unfair, and I'm really shocked that there's not really been a whole lot of discourse around that, isn't it? What are your thoughts on that?
Let me put it this way, there has been some discourse, but maybe not enough. And like many things, there are, two sides to it. There are certain women who have, I think, slightly older children who are actually feeling and who are privileged enough to have help at home,
Right.
are actually feeling very happy that they have work from home. So they save on the commuting time. They are physically present at home, even though their children might be in another room with their own devices, and they have help at home. So that's a small proportion of the population who can afford it and who are happy. So that is there. I think I don't want to say it's all, doom and gloom, but there are a lot of women for whom it's actually turned out to be a blessing. Because they save on a lot of traveling, and they feel reassured that they are able to honor their role as homemaker, and at the same time work while being physically present, because that was a source of tension for a lot of women.
Right.
For many others, it has not been so comfortable, because when they are at home, the primary responsibility of the home is still on the woman.
Yes.
And if they haven't been able to ask for support or negotiate boundaries, it becomes hugely stressful. So you'll actually see the workforce participation of women has dipped in the last year, because when it comes to making the choice, as to who should keep their job and who should leave. It's usually the woman who very often willingly leaves the job and, to do justice to her family and to take care of that. So it's been very hard for a lot of women because burden, and I'm using the word burden because, doing all of this by yourself at home can be extremely challenging. You're not able to focus on the work. You have children who constantly need your attention. Your, support system is not the way it was earlier. You don't have school where you can send the children away and get that space and peace of mind. You don't have extra classes. Like a friend of mine was saying, my child used to go and, go for 3-4 classes after school now, physical, where they need to be physically present. Now, none of them are there. I not only have to supervise classes, but I have to keep them entertained after that as well. Because in the height of the pandemic, nobody was going out to play. Nobody was going out to meet anybody. So I think it became very, very burdensome for a lot of women. And it's just showing in the numbers where many, many women are leaving the workforce. In fact, I'm a part of a small group of senior women leaders, and we were discussing exactly this. And, all of us are, we've spent 25 years working. We all have older kids, but they were talking about how difficult it's been for younger women and how many of them could not find women, even though they have a, diversity agenda. They could not find women who were willing to apply for some of these jobs in the current circumstances. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned about younger women, especially, right? Because I've just recently heard the story of someone I know who is probably married into a fairly conservative sort of a family, and she had to quit because there are a couple of instances where she was in a meeting and a newborn was crying, and she couldn't immediately go and take care of it. Of course, she had some help, but she was being judged.
Yeah.
Right? Versus, okay, is the meeting more important than your child? So an extraordinarily depressing sort of a story, I thought. It was just going back to the book itself, right? Like when you intended to write this book, right? And you talk about all of these archetypes in the way we just discussed. What did you want as an intended result of this book? What did you want the reader, especially women, to sort of take away from this?
Yeah, I would say definitely 2-3 things. First is to recognize and reaffirm the fact that women have a lot of inner power. Even though there is imbalance in the outside world and we may not be in positions of power, let's recognize that a lot of the qualities we have are actually sources of power for us. So I think that is one thing I really wanted I will just say at an insight level. To feel that we are truly powerful, because the premise of the book is if you want to have power in the outside world and you want to effect change and you want to end systemic oppression or create what we call, everybody says, to create a better world, you need to first access your own inner power and be very comfortable with who you are and what you bring to the table as you go to effect change in the outside world. So that is one part. The secondly, and this happened after I wrote the book, is that I am in the process of creating a whole ecosystem, what I call a platform, a movement, which uses the book and which will actually lead to a playbook for women to access and tap into for success, for happiness, for their personal growth and transformation. So my intent was to create this entire movement, and what now, I have creating this brand called Powerful Life, which is an extension of the book, where you can take a tool to find out what your power is. And as a coach and as a facilitator, I'm going to leverage that skill and experience that I have to use it to, bring this work to more and more people. So that was, that came about after I wrote the book, is to actually, if I were to say at a big picture level, to bring about better gender equality and to reduce the power imbalance in the world by using this particular source and a platform. So, if each one of us, and I'm saying women, but it's true for men as well, because I know men are disempowered in many ways also. If we can all understand ourselves better, leverage our strengths, figure out to overcome some of these blocks and limitations that we have, we can be much more effective. We can be happier in whatever we do. So that is really the philosophy of the book. And
Right.
archetypes, I think, are a fun way or interesting way that I find interesting to communicate this.
No, I think what I loved about this is one is there is this discovery process
Yeah.
of who you are, and there are enough reference points in this book. And then the second part is also that you're referring to it as a power, right? It's not, you're not just saying that, hey, get to know yourself better.
Yeah.
You're saying that there's actually a power, which means that there are these levers that you can use
Yes.
in different situations, which can help you overcome that, right? So then are you thinking of, say, for example, workshops and
Yes.
other physical events where you can sort of impart this sort of almost like a coaching experience? Is that how
Yeah.
you're viewing it?
Absolutely. So there's a, how shall I say, I see this as a path. You read the book, then you can go to the, I have a website, you can go and take an assessment tool, which will give you your own power profile. So it'll tell you, what is your dominant power? Are you more of a Rishika? You use more of the Veera? Or what is a latent power which you haven't developed fully? So you'll get an idea about,
Right.
what your own powers look like. And then I'm going to be setting up a coaching practice as well, where now you have this tool, you figured out, you've read the book, you can have a coach take you on your own journey. And then, we're also working on creating a Powerful Life workshop around each of these 6 powers. And retreats where people can go and spend some time. And I think one interesting thing which I'm noticing is a lot of women going on holidays together, and what we call these girls trips together. So like that, we've done a couple of retreats before, and it was amazing. So just go out, self-discovery, explore yourself using this as a framework. So that is really the plan and the idea, to build this out into something which is, I think, as far as I know, there's nothing like that. And it's very rooted in the Asian ethos. And I think
Right.
that also makes it very easy for people to connect and relate and say, hey, you're talking to me. It's not some vague thing from some other part of the world.
Right.
I want to ask you one last book related question before we move on to other things. Your book is filled with quotes from mythology and literature and real life. You quote from Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens to the Ramayana and to multiple others. I want to ask you, what were your big book inspirations in writing this book itself?
I think, in a way, the biggest inspirations, I would say, were the Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? Still relevant after all these years. Still influence and impact our lives in ways I didn't realize, till now. How
In a good way or a bad way?
both, I would say. Both. They are powerful stories, right? So it's interesting that these were the 2 most watched shows on television, I think, in India, despite everything that we have. So I think in definitely in a lot of good ways. But when it comes to gender, specifically in that area, those are the stories we've grown up hearing, right? And those are the stories we've grown up imbued in us. My daughter, now she's 20. When she was a young girl, she used to watch a CD of Ramayana again and again and again.
Really?
Yeah. It was a cartoon. I think it was like a Japanese animated cartoon. And every day, to get her to eat, we would put on Ramayana, and then she would play Sita, Sita. Of course, now she doesn't want to acknowledge that. But it's in our daily life. People use the term suffering Sita. And just yesterday, I was watching some very recent movie where he says some woman is called Kaikeyi. Said, oh, she must be such a bad woman. It's there in our life. So I think those were 2 big inspirations. And as I read them and as I understood them, I was fascinated by the women in those stories and how they are portrayed, and what does that mean for young women of our generation who are still told today, don't cross that Lakshman Rekha which is drawn. So I'm very how shall I say, I'm very connected and I'm very proud of our culture. And, I've grown up with these stories. But when I started seeing them through this particular lens, it was very, very interesting. So those were inspirations. And of course, all the books that I have read, like Sapiens, where there's an interesting chapter which I quote where he says, really couldn't figure out why patriarchy has been existing for such a long time in our world, right? It's trying to trace the origins of patriarchy, and he comes up with 5, 6 arguments which all don't seem to hold water. So that was interesting. So, of course, all the books that I've read, the movies that I've seen, my own life story, the stories, the Vasuki story was told by my grandmother. And that's how somewhere it just I remember it. So all of these in a way have become sources for me to draw from and look at, and my own people around me as well.
Right.
So it's been very interesting.
I tell stories. So my 4-year-old daughter sleeps, and often I find myself when I don't have a great book that I remember, I just tell a story from Ramayana, and she loves the Lakshman Rekha story. But her favorite character in this entire story is Ravana. I don't know if I should be worried.
No, it's.
So, Nirupama, we usually end the episode by talking to our guest about what he or she is watching or reading or listening to, for that matter. But I had a different twist to this question for you, because you spoke about films now. You said you're a big film fan, and you have a lot of references, right from Julie to multiple world cinema films as well in your book. As I was reading the book, I was reminded of this concept, which I've thought about a lot in the last 7-8 years. It's this concept called Bechdel test, right? And the Bechdel test, of course, comes from a cartoon strip written by a woman. And for the uninitiated, it basically is two women talking about cinema.
Yeah.
And then one person says, "Listen, I have 3 tests after which I'll watch a film. One is the film should have 2 women characters who have a name, and they're talking to each other.
And
they're
not talking
to
about
each
a man.
Which is not about a man,
Yeah.
and about something else. And it ends by her saying, the last film I saw was The Aliens. So that's how bad Bollywood is. But, talking about your recommendations, and I consume a lot of content, partly because of my work. I've been very impressed by content like Madam Secretary, right? Which I thought
Yes.
really, really broke stereotypes in a very different way. Not just by the protagonist, but like, for example, some of the armed forces head are actually women.
Yes. And I
all
must
of
tell you, that's a show that my mother, my daughter, and I watched together last
Oh,
year.
nice.
So it appeals to, it cuts across generations. We're big Madam Secretary fans. We
Yes.
watched all the 6 episodes till she becomes,
No,
Madam
I'm
President.
still in season 2 or 3. Don't.
Oops. Okay, sorry.
But what are your favorite Bechdel test winning content like Madam Secretary? What else have you enjoyed from that perspective?
Gosh, I'm sure there's a long list, but I am trying to think of some of these which I have watched. So let me say, in the Western ones, I liked Homeland. Because the protagonist is a woman doing a very tough job, and yes, her gender comes in the way sometimes, but yet not. So I think I really liked Carrie, and I liked Homeland. What else did I see? I like some of the shows that we second season of Four More Shots, which was interesting.
Oh, really?
It had some twists and tail. There were some things which I would not say I was a great fan, but watching it as a woman talking about some of these issues, I think it was interesting. Another one which I really liked was The Bold Types. I don't know whether you've heard of it. The 3 young millennial women in New York, and of course, I couldn't really relate too much to their context because they're as old as my daughter is, and I'm like, okay, my daughter's in the US. Is this what she's doing? But I really liked it for the way it showed women supporting each other. They have a great boss who is a woman, and it brought up a lot of contemporary issues which you could connect and relate to. So I think just to make us think about some of these things, that was one of the latest ones that I saw. And some of the others, I'm not talking so much about production quality or the acting, but just having some of these issues out there, I think was very interesting. Bombay Begums were interesting, right? So just looking at different female characters, the way they are portrayed. And the other one I saw was this political one, I think called City of Dreams. That's also about Maharashtra politics, about this woman and her, how she's the sister of the daughter of the ex-chief minister or something, and how she slowly comes into her own with, a lot of, moral dilemmas and shades of gray and stuff like that. So, which was also very interesting. So now, of course, when I watch it, I watch to see, okay, what is her archetype and what is the transformation she is going through? And it's interesting to watch some of these right now. So I think there's a lot of interesting content which is moving away from the way typically both men and women are being portrayed. So I think that is interesting. And I think in India, we're still struggling to find out, what is the new woman supposed to be, right? So which is why you'll see some of these the stories that we are doing, some people can resonate, some can't. We still, I guess, trying to figure out the so-called contemporary, and I won't use the word modern, but contemporary Indian woman. Who is she? What are her values? What is important for her? It's still a question that comes up in a lot of our conversations. What do I keep? What do I leave? Who am I really? And I might look like a Western woman from the outside, but deep down I have certain, everybody says deep down I have Indian values, whatever they are. So it's interesting. I think we're going through this period of self-discovery and churn, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out. And I'm including myself in it as well. It's not that I'm not just an observer, I'm also a participant. And yeah.
Excellent. And now I have to ask you, what do you think is Elizabeth McCord's archetype?
Veera Rani.
Nice. you know exactly why you say what you did. One has to read the book.
One has to read the book, and then you can relate. So usually you will find that a well-written story has an arc where there is a change, there is a transition, where women, and I'm talking about men as well. When you look at the hero's journey, both of them, we grow by embracing other archetypes. We grow by exploring different archetypes and figuring out how to use each one of them, and also staying true to our essence and ourself.
Right.
So I'm a fan of Elizabeth McCord, but I think these are her true dominant ones.
Excellent. Nirupama, thank you so much for being on this show. It was absolutely inspiring. And good luck to you and the whole Powerful Life ecosystem. I'm really looking forward to how this shapes up.
Thank you, Karthik. I'm looking forward to it as well. And thank you for having me. And it's always nice to talk about your book and talk about a whole lot of other things as well along with it. My pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And filter_coffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Misconduct with Raghavi and Nisha, we learn about the very famous case of Indrani Mukherjee. Not the murder, but her foreign investment violations and money laundering. It's an exciting double episode. On Naan Curry, Sataf and Archit talk about the superfoods haldi or turmeric, its health benefits, cultural significance, economics, and much more. On Storytellers and Storytellers, Vineet is joined by Keshav Chaturvedi. He's the host of Tere Mere Raste and a veteran photographer. He shares his journeys from photos to podcasts. On The Habit Coach with Ashton, host of Paisa Vaisa, Anupam Gupta shares how one can cultivate the habit of saving. And on GabyCD, find out what Sunetro and Farad's favorite picks are when it comes to the portrayal of queer sex on screen. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of the shows on the IVM network for that matter, please do tell a friend. We really appreciate that. And finally, I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Ciat Cred, Banco Baroda, Quarter, and CoinSwitch Kuber. We really do appreciate the support.
Do you like true crime stories?
Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes?
More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes.
Actually, Indian criminals that are women?
Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi.
And I am Nisha.
We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more.
You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.